Samantha Blickhan from Zooniverse. She is the co-director and guide for the strategy and vision, and I'm very interested to get more information about Zooniverse. Please, is she up and on one? Yes. We cannot hear her.
One moment, I'll keep talking.
Yes, now it works.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's been really fascinating to hear the presentations from everyone else in this session, and thanks again to the organizers for all your work and for inviting me to come talk. I'm going to try and keep this very brief. I'm aware we're approaching the end of the day, which I'm sure has been a very long day for you. It's still sort of beginning for me, but I'll just dive in, and I'm very happy to share my slide deck afterward, in case I have to sort of gloss over some things and folks want to spend a little bit more time with some of the information that I'm going to share. I'm just going to do a quick overview of who we are, what we do, how we engage members of the public, and that'll include a little bit of information at the end about what people do with the data that they create through our platform, and some of the challenges that they experience as well. So first, I'll just do a quick definition of crowdsourcing in its current iteration for those who are unfamiliar with online crowdsourcing projects. Some folks use the term citizen science or citizen research. I tend to use crowdsourcing as a more inclusive term, just as a humanist, or also participatory research, since a lot of people don't see themselves in science-based terminology if they aren't doing traditional scientific research. But I think, at least over here in the US, people are sort of understanding more and more that there's quite a lot of gray area between the different types of terminology and the type of work that people are doing in these spaces. But for the purposes of today, the definition that I'll use is, at its best, crowdsourcing is a form of digitally enabled participation that creates meaningful opportunities for the public to experience collections while undertaking a range of tasks that make those collections more easily discoverable and usable by others. And this is from a book called The Collective Wisdom Handbook, Perspectives on Crowdsourcing and Cultural Heritage, which was written in 2021 by a group of 16 leaders in the field of cultural heritage crowdsourcing within the US and the UK. It was created as part of a larger grant-funded effort called the Collective Wisdom Project, for which I was a co-investigator along with Megan Ferreter, formerly of the US Library of Congress, and our PI, Mia Ridge, of the British Library. So on this table, I've broken down the definition that I used in the previous slide to include some examples of why individuals or organizations might want to run a crowdsourcing project. I won't linger on this today, since I think everybody here really understands why this work is important. And we've heard some really wonderful examples of engaging people through collections materials already. But I just want to point out, I think, that this list is not exhaustive. And I think mostly the nuance that I'll share is the balance between the two sides of this table. So if you find that your motivations for running a public engagement project fall more on one or the other side of this table, there's a good chance you may run into some issues down the line because you're either too focused on data production and not focused enough on the people element of the work, or you've put too much of a focus on the public engagement aspects and haven't given enough thought to your data management practices, how to make sure that you're getting useful, usable data out of your publicly engaged efforts. So to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, I'll just talk a little bit, very, very briefly, about what Zooniverse is and how we facilitate the crowdsourcing process for researchers and volunteers. So we are the largest platform in the world for online crowdsourced research. We refer to ourselves mostly as a platform for people-powered research. And we do this by providing a space for researchers to build and run projects which invite volunteers to help these teams process data to aid in their research efforts. The platform is maintained by a team of developers and researchers based at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, where I'm located, Oxford University in the UK, and the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, also in the US. We work with hundreds of research teams around the world, and since the platform launched in 2009, almost 3 million registered volunteers have collectively produced almost 1 billion, that's billion with a B, classifications across more than 450 projects. And the way that Zooniverse projects work is that for each project on the platform, many volunteers interact with data sets. These can be images, video, audio, or data files. And they do this by engaging in a task or a series of tasks depending on the particular data set and the research goals of the team. So these can be anything from answering questions about galaxies based on their morphological characteristics to drawing on high-resolution electron microscopy images of cells to help scientists identify and segment the features that they want to study, or even helping to validate and correct automated transcriptions of handwritten field journals. While projects are ongoing, research teams are expected to engage with volunteers on the project message boards like the one shown here. And that's really just to provide support, to answer questions, to discuss the project and offer assistance, as well as to communicate information back to participants about how the project is going, how near it is to completion, whether there are new outcomes or publications, things like that, helping to just sort of reinforce that the labor people are providing is going towards a specific outcome rather than just sort of going into a black box and then you never hear about what happens in the end. Once the data collection process is complete, the researchers carry out their data analysis and then share the results back with the public. And this is actually a requirement of using our platform. You have to make your results available within 2 years of your project's completion. That's a pretty vague requirement. We don't have specific publication or licensing standards on the platform just because such a range of projects create and run projects on Zooniverse. But we do believe that volunteers should be able to access the data that they helped to create in some way. So if you're asking the public to help you generate a data set, it isn't appropriate necessarily to then turn around and host it behind a paywall. Obviously, there's a lot of gray area. I think the previous presentation was a really great example of the tension sometimes between open data sets and cultural or archival responsibility. And that can take a lot of different forms. So I think what we do is really just try to balance that tension whenever we can between what we owe to our participants in terms of responding to their labor, and then also respecting the collection that we're working with. So the main tool that supports this work is called the Project Builder, and this is a browser-based tool that allows anyone to create and run a Zooniverse project for free. There's no cost to use these tools, no financial cost to use these tools, I should say, because staff time and human labor is a resource. So this is a screenshot of the Project Builder user interface. It's fairly straightforward. You move through the blue tabs on the left side of the interface, and the pages allow you to do things like add content, build workflows, give access to different team members, upload data, and export your results. Some of our projects can also be accessed via our mobile app, which supports a very limited number of task types, but can process data very, very quickly. And then to date, also just I've included at the bottom of this screen also a link to our publications page, and more than 400 peer-reviewed articles to date have been published using data from Zooniverse project. So That page includes a breakdown of the publications by project as well as discipline. I've included some information on data export types. There are many kinds of data produced through the Zooniverse project. The main data is the classification data. So this is the task data. That's going to be formatted as JSON embedded within a CSV. I've included a link here to our data exports overview so you can read more about what all of these distinctions specifically mean. But I will note that the typical structure of Zooniverse projects is that teams collect multiple classifications per subject, typically 3 or more. And this is a built-in quality control method to mitigate potential user error. But it does mean that there is a reconciliation step that has to take place at the end of your active data collection period to determine a single consensus result, if that is something that you're looking for. We have some in-house code for that in our aggregations data repository and a few additional resources that are available depending on the tasks being used in a project. So now I'll quickly just share some examples of how people have chosen to store and disseminate their Zooniverse project data, thinking about the theme today of the emerging social and cultural role of the repository. There's a range of examples, mainly involving text data, but Zooniverse teams have also done projects with audio data, mostly for ecology projects rather than oral histories, but also video data and photographs. But I'll quickly frame this as something that I do see as a major struggle for teams working with our platform that I think groups like PHAIDRA can potentially help to solve, is that I think people often struggle to identify what kind of data they need to come out of a Zooniverse project. Oftentimes people are running projects to create access to data. They're digitizing records. And so in those scenarios, it can be difficult to identify what kind of data somebody might need to use the digitized resource that they're creating, and also to think about how that data might be stored in the short, medium, and long term. And so I frequently get questions from teams around how they should store their data, but I have to sort of gently tell them that I can't make that decision for them because it really depends where their data are going, where they're going to store it, what kind of repository it's going in, who's managing that repository, et cetera. And so ultimately, what I tell people is that when you're building a project, you have to design for the data that you want. And so in the context of a resource like PHAIDRA, I think having shared standards or moving towards shared standards around research data management is a really effective way to help guide people who are aiming to create publicly engaged research efforts like the ones that we host on Zooniverse. So here's a quick just tour through some examples. I know it's after 6, and so please jump in if we need to do a hard stop. But I think I probably have 5 minutes max. So I appreciate everyone's patience and hanging in there. This is a project called the Davy Notebooks Project. It was led by a team at Lancaster University, and they produced transcription data for the handwritten notebooks of Sir Humphrey Davy. They did add TEI markup after exporting their data from Zooniverse, and this was difficult. This took a long time, but the project partners in the library at the university helped create the schema that was needed to map the transcription information to all of the encoded materials. But they have this beautiful critical edition as a result, which was part of their project goal. A similar and different example of a team using their institutional repository to house project data is from a project called My Dear Mr. Wells, War of the Worlds Fan and Hate Mail. University of Michigan here in the States has a bunch of letters that were sent to Orson Welles after the original 1938 broadcast of War of the Worlds. Quite seasonally appropriate, given that today's Halloween. But they did a crowdsourcing project and transcribed the letters. And now all of these letters are available on the Michigan Institutional Repository, along with the original images. The data set is slightly simpler. It's more recent writing. It's from late 1930s instead of the early 1800s. So in some ways, there's less need for encoding like the Davy project did for that kind of context building. But again, this is part of the decision-making process that a team has to go through when choosing to do a project like this one. So this is from a project called Shakespeare's World, that transcribed early modern manuscripts from the Folger Shakespeare Library. And for this particular data set, Victoria Van Heining, one of the leads of that project, chose to publish a version of this large data set in the Journal of Open Humanities Data. And this publication includes individual volunteer transcriptions, so non-aggregate data, just raw project data. And given that a major challenge for many teams is that aggregation step, as I mentioned earlier, for this team, while they did create critical versions of the resulting transcriptions for the Folger, they also just released a massive open data set that includes these transcriptions, as well as some supplementary social data sets from the project message board and blog. So this is a way to publish data while also being able to give some insight into the methods with which the data were created as well. A very sort of low effort version of a similar approach in terms of publishing raw data. This is from a project called Mutual Muses, run by a team at the Getty Research Institute. They put their project data into a GitHub repository owned by their institution. And there are pros and cons to something like this. I think particularly for anybody who's concerned about sustainability of results or things like link rot, this team clearly signposted on their repository that it was not going to be actively maintained, which communicates a certain expectation level in terms of what people can anticipate having access to in the long term. So the raw data remains available on this repository, but for example, the PDFs that they made of the resulting transcriptions now have broken links. So this is, sort of sharing some of the pros and cons that people should just be aware of, thinking about, how they're going to share their project data. Two more, and then I'll be done. It's also important to consider how the outputs of this work are being used in conjunction with new technologies, such as machine learning. So this is from a project called St. George on a Bike, which was a partnership between Barcelona Supercomputing Center and Europeana. And they used Zooniverse to collect label data to train this model. So DE Art, dataset of European art, is an object detection and pose classification dataset that is meant to be a reference for paintings between the 12th and 18th century. So that's a description taken from their project website. And the label categories for this data set include things like person, tree, halo, horse, boat. But it's a massive data set. I think it's more than 15,000 images, about 80% of which are non-iconic. And those are aligned with bounding box identification, positional data as well. And then they released this on Hugging Face, as well as, I think, Zenodo and things like that. The link that I put on this slide includes the full list of places where they've hosted their data. And then the final example I'll show is from the Boston Public Library here in the US, and it includes the results of a project called Anti-Slavery Manuscripts at the Boston Public Library. So this team didn't publish their data in a traditional format, but they made it publicly available as a finding aid through their digital repository. So the transcription data for this project supports inline, in-text search for this entire collection of more than 12,000 handwritten letters sent during the years around and including the American Civil War. So the yellow line you see here is an indicator of where a search term appears on a given page within that specific collections item. And I also just want to flag that we encourage teams to share their results and data sets with us so that we can add them to our publications page under the data category. The link is here that you can explore more examples if you're interested. And please feel free to reach out via email. I know we're a bit past time. I apologize. But I'll stop here and we can see if anybody has quick questions.
Thank you, Samantha. I think we can take one question from the audience. There's one question. So I have a question. You mentioned the repository also as an important kind of environment for the whole, I take now the term citizen science. And your platform as more to outreach and communicate with all the participants. So the question is for me, how can we get closer together and bring these worlds in a bigger picture together?
Yes, I love that question. I mean, I think certainly if I am vested in, I'm deeply, I think it's very important for people to be aware of resources like PHAIDRA. So I think, part of what I see as our role is, as I increase my own awareness as the humanities lead for the platform, I can facilitate that connection as an individual, but I think there are ways to sort of scale that a little bit. So I think certainly there are opportunities on our end to signpost resources and sort of point people towards different options for how they can be creating data that links to existing structures that are perhaps more stable than some custom data publication opportunities. I think particularly now, we're all learning very quickly about how fragile the digital ecosystem is. Alica Ortega in the DH space has famously said there is nothing more ephemeral than a website. And I think we're all really learning this in real time. And so part of it is just building awareness and encouraging people to follow the sort of safety in numbers approach, as it were, which is a very reductive way of talking about it. But I do think there is some truth to it. But I don't think I'm saying anything that everybody in the room probably has heard before as well.
Yes, I think we are quite aware of the situation, and the question is, how can we reach out to these people that are not aware about this?
Yeah.
So, thank you again.
Of course.
Thank you again. I think we are now at the end of the conference. Are there, from the organizer side, want to say some words to the end?
I have nothing in particular to say. Just thank you for being here. It's been a very interesting day with a lot of projects and thoughts to think about in the next of our digital repositories life. And so thank you and good night.